Today, I'm going to be doing a presentation called El Camino Real de los Tejas, Past and Present. And I'll go over 5 different themes today. First, I'll define what a Camino Real is. Then I'll go over a brief history of the trail. Then I'll talk about modern events leading up to the designation of the trail as a National Historic Trail. Then what it means to be a National Historic Trail and part of the National Trail System. And then finally, how you can see and experience the trail today. So as Jennifer said, in order to preserve bandwidth and make sure that everything is moving as smoothly as possible on my end, I'm going to turn off my camera and then share my screen so you can see a presentation that I have. So if you'll give me just 1 second, I'm going to try to make that happen here.
Oh, so.
All right. And hopefully everyone can see my screen now, I'm hoping. So as I said, the presentation is called El Camino Real de los Tejas, Past and Present, and we're going to begin by defining a Camino Real. So, Caminos Reales were royal roads, and these roads in North America emanated from the Spanish viceregal capital of Mexico City, and they connected Spanish provincial capitals. So they went from, say, Mexico City to Querétaro to Zacatecas, Zacatecas over to Monclova, and then eventually over to Los Azales, which was the first capital of Texas, and then secondarily San Antonio when it was the capital. Caminos Reales also connected mines and villas with royal charters. So villas such as San Antonio had royal charters which allowed them royal privileges. Here is a map of the Caminos Reales coming into the southwestern U.S. And as you can see, there are 3 caminos that were in the U.S. in times past. Our trail, El Camino Real de los Tejas, which runs across Texas into Louisiana. Our sister trail, El Camino Real de Tierra Adentro, which crossed through El Paso before heading to Santa Fe. And then the Camino Real de California, which runs along the coast there through many of the missions in the California area. Only 2 of these trails are National Historic Trails, our trail and the Camino Real de Tierra Adentro in New Mexico. Though the Camino Real de California is likely the most famous of the Caminos Reales in the U.S., and if you've ever been to some of the missions out there, such as Mission Santa Barbara or Santa Ynez and San Juan Capistrano, those are missions along the Camino Real de California. So now we're going to go over a brief history of the trail. And what I'm going to detail are early Spanish entradas or expeditions that blaze the early routes of the Camino, and then the very early Anglo period of the trail. So true intentional Texas history really begins in 1685 when the Frenchman La Salle landed on the Texas coast and established Fort St. Louis on Garcitas Creek in Victoria County. There had been other Spanish encounters with Texas before this, such as Cabeza de Vaca or Coronado, but those were more accidental or incidental, just crossing across Texas. This is when the French come into Texas and really forced the Spanish to focus on the state. And because the French did this, the Spanish took it as an incursion into their territory and began sending out entradas or expeditions both by land and by sea. Over the next several years, expeditions by sea came out of places like Veracruz and Mexico in search of La Salle's fort. But because of shallow bays and unnavigable rivers, they were unable to find La Salle's fort this way. At the same time, expeditions were conducted by land, and these were done by a gentleman named Alonso de Leon. And de Leon would come out of a town named Cadrieta, and the first time he did it was in 1686, and he headed to the Rio Grande, and he went to the mouth of the river. But rather than turning north into Texas, he headed south towards Veracruz, and so he was going the wrong way. A year later, de Leon did the same thing. He left Cadrieta, he headed to the Rio Grande, and he went to the mouth of the river. But this time he did turn north into Texas, and he probably got as far as what's present-day Baffin Bay near Kingsville. And y'all are familiar with Baffin Bay, you know it's a very large inlet, and the Spanish saw this as impassable. And because of that, they turned around and said, you know what, they're not here. These are just rumors about the French being out here in Texas. Yet, at the same time, those rumors persisted, so that in 1688, De Leon captured a Frenchman named Jean Jury, who was acting as a chief among the Native American tribes in the Anacacho Mountains near Del Rio. So that by 1689, De Leon was able to discover Fort St. Louis when he had Jean Jury in tow. And it was in complete shambles. And there were French books that were thrown about the landscape with the pages torn out of them. There were 3 French bodies, including a woman still in her dress, the Spanish gave proper burial to. Even the famed French cannons that were discovered via archaeological efforts in recent years were discovered at this time and buried by the Spanish, so that in case the French came back, they wouldn't be so easily found. And of this 1689 expedition, famed Spanish colonial historian Carlos Castaneda states that it truly marks the beginnings of Texas, because this is the first time that these expeditions were penetrating as far as the Guadalupe River. And around that same time, according to Spanish record, Maria de Agreda, the lady in blue you can see pictured here, miraculously appeared to the Tejas Indians in East Texas and said to them that they should seek out the Spanish so that they could learn about the Catholic faith. Therefore, a year later, in 1690, De Leon journeyed to East Texas, where on the banks of the Neches River, Mission San Francisco de los Tejas, the first mission in Texas, was established. So the beginnings of Spanish missionary aspirations and El Camino Real were being laid into the state at this point in time. And over the next several years, the Camino Real became a major route of travel. In 1700, the mission of Presidio San Juan Bautista was founded on the Rio Grande, and that's about 20 miles or so south of Eagle Pass, just on the other side of the river, at a town that's now called Guerrero. And in 1714, the French founded Natchitoches out on the eastern end of the trail. And once again, the Spanish took this as a potential incursion into their territory. And so because of that, they established Los Adais about 15 miles west of Natchitoches in present-day Louisiana. So you had these 2 colonial powers essentially thinking that they were in the middle of nowhere in the wilderness with no one around and battling each other for control of the territory. By 1718, the Villa of San Fernando de Bajada and Mission San Antonio Valero were founded in San Antonio. And so as you can see, the trail was really allowing this facilitation of trade and culture between Texas and Louisiana. And eventually, it allowed Anglo settlers to head west into Texas along the trail. So, if we fast forward about 100 years, Moses Austin came into San Antonio on the Camino Real to obtain a Spanish land grant. And as we know, his son Stephen F. Austin made good on that sometime later. And around that same time, Anglo-American colonists began entering Texas at Gaines Ferry on the Sabine River and crossing into places like Nacogdoches and San Antonio along the road. Even famed Alamo combatant Davy Crockett came down the Camino Real to San Antonio. And it can be said that he would have continued down the Camino Real to San Juan Bautista on the Rio Grande had he not met his fate at that battle. Because in his last known letter, he was saying that he was going to journey with the men from the Alamo down to the river to confront the Mexican forces down that way. So, as I said, that's a brief history of the trail. If you're interested in learning more in-depth history about it, please visit our website, which is elcaminotrail.org, and click on our news and events link. And there you'll see a sublink that says books and periodicals. And there are over 500 reference materials where you can learn more about the history of the trail there. At this point, I'm going to talk about the Camino Real in modern times. Once again, modern events leading up to the designation of the Camino as a National Historic Trail, what it means to be a National Historic Trail and part of the National Trail System, and then finally how you can see and experience the trail. So the modern history of the Camino Real began in 1915 when the Texas legislature appropriated approximately $5,000 to be in Zibly to survey the Camino Real. And over the next several years, Sibley did survey a route of the trail so that by 1918, markers such as this were placed along that route. And they say Kings Highway, Camino Real, Old San Antonio Road, marked by the Daughters of the American Revolution and the state of Texas, AD 1918. So these things are now over 100 years old, and they're historic in themselves. There's roughly about 125 from the Sabine River to the Rio Grande, and they're generally about 5 miles apart and generally on the north and west side of roadways, though they have been moved in certain locations due to things like roadway expansion and housing development. A real interesting story about a little bit of modern history of the Camino Real is that there were some ladies from the DAR looking for these markers in South Texas as they were trying to GPS and catalog where they were all at. And they were somewhere in South Texas driving around where they knew one of these should have been. And they couldn't find it. And they just kept looking and looking, saying, it should be here, but it's not here anywhere. And they came to realize that it had been taken off the roadway and it was being used as a doorstep at someone's trailer home there off the side of the road. So they obviously weren't happy about that. They went and got the local sheriff and were able to get the marker back on the roadway. So a little bit of ancillary Camino Real history for you there from modern times. In 1929, the Texas legislature designated the Old San Antonio Road as a historic highway of Texas. And this was the first time in the history of the state that an old historic roadway was designated as a historic highway of Texas. And it wasn't until 2011 that the entirety of the Camino Real was designated as a historic highway. And that was only the second time in the history of the state that that happened. And that same legislation allows us to put modern National Park Service signs out on roadways that mirror routes of the historic Camino Real. By 1949, most of the road from San Antonio to the Sabine River had been paved. So the old Caliche Road that used to have wagons and carts rolling down it now had automobiles zooming into the future. And if we fast forward about 40 years, in 1991, the Texas legislature formed the Old San Antonio Road Preservation Commission. And that commission instructed TxDOT to survey the condition of the Camino Real. And this was done to commemorate the 300th anniversary of those entradas that De Leon was doing in the late 1680s and 1690. That study, which you can see pictured here, determined that there were at least 5 additional routes that were used at various times over the trail's history. That study also served as the basis for the National Park Service to conduct a feasibility study to determine whether or not the Camino Real met the criteria of being designated as a National Historic Trail. That feasibility study did in fact determine that the Camino met the criteria, so that on October 18th, 2004, El Camino Real was designated as a National Historic Trail and part of the National Trail System. So this begs the question, what is the National Trail System? The National Trail System was established by the National Trail System Act of 1968, and it was signed into law by a Texan, President LBJ. And now that system is composed of 30 national scenic and historic trails. There are 11 national scenic trails, such as the Appalachian Trail, Pacific Crest Trail, or the Continental Divide Trail. And there are 19 national historic trails, such as our trail, the Trail of Tears, the Santa Fe Trail, or the Oregon Trail. And if you look at this map, you can see that there are trails all over the country. As a matter of fact, with recent changes to the North Country Trail in the northern part of the country out there near Michigan and places like that, all 50 states now have a national scenic or historic trail within them. So these things are across the country. But if you look in Texas, you can see that our trail is the only trail in the core of the state. The other Camino Real just barely skirts through El Paso before heading to Santa Fe. And because of that, Texas is a hotbed for National Historic Trail development right now. There are feasibility studies going on for other potential National Historic Trails. And these are trails such as the Chisholm and Great Western Cattle Trails, the Butterfield Overland Stage Route, and even the Route 66, the corridor of Route 66 is being considered as a National Historic Trail now. And if that were to get designated as an NHT, it would be the first time in the history of the Trail System Act that a modern roadway has attained National Historic Trail status. So what is a National Historic Trail? According to the Trail System Act, it says that it is an elongated trail that must follow as closely as possible the original route of historic travel. And that's how a historic trail like the Camino Real differs from a scenic trail like the Appalachian. When they're building a trail like the Appalachian on the ground, they can essentially go almost anywhere they need to build that trail. Whereas with the Camino Real, we couldn't say build a trail from Austin to Dallas because historically it never went that way. So what does the Trail System Act say about the Camino Real? It says that in general, it's 2,580 miles of route extending from the Rio Grande near Eagle Pass, Laredo to Natchitoches, Louisiana. And here's a map of the Camino so you can see it at a little bit of a closer view. And as you can see, it's a very braided network of trails. And there are several reasons for that. For instance, if there was flooding coming off of the Edwards Plateau between Austin and San Antonio, explorers would have gone a different way to have avoided those flooded rivers and streams. Or if there were certain foodstuffs available on one part of the trail versus another, they would have gone that way to have taken advantage of those foodstuffs. Or if there were Native American hostilities on one part of the trail versus another, they would have gone a different way to have avoided those hostilities. Another thing I would like to point out here on this map is that route that Zivley surveyed in the early 1900s. I hope that you can see my cursor here. Starting at the Rio Grande, that route that Zivley surveyed is largely Highway 21 as it makes its way from the Sabine River through San Augustine, Nacogdoches, down to Alto and Crockett. So it gets to about right here near Midway, where it breaks over is the old San Antonio Road across towards Bryan College Station, where it comes at 21 again at about this point, down through Bastrop into San Marcos, where it then turns into many small roads that mirror I-35 here in central Texas. And then south of San Antonio, it takes this curve here down through Atascosa County all the way to Guerrero, right there where San Juan Bautista is at. So now I'd like to talk about how you can see and experience the trail today. Starting at the Rio Grande, there's a place called the Jesus Trevino Fort and Rancho, which is in San Ignacio, Texas. This is one of my favorite places anywhere along the trail. It's an old Casa Fuerte or stronghouse right on the banks of the Rio Grande. And essentially, it served as a home initially for Jesus Trevino and his family that was expanded into a walled compound so that they could seek shelter from Native Americans and other threats there in the vicinity. This place is owned by the River Pierce Foundation, which is a nonprofit organization based in San Ignacio. And it is open on Sundays once a month by appointment. That may not be, they may not have that going on right now at this time because of the pandemic, but I encourage you to visit River Pierce's website to find out if they are still offering visits at this time. San Ignacio is a place like no other on the trail, and I would highly encourage you to visit it. Heading up the trail towards San Antonio, places like the Alamo and the San Antonio Missions are part of the trail. Many of you have probably been to the Alamo or the Missions and may not have realized you were at a Camino Real site. And what we're doing to try to change that is we're working with the Park Service and the Alamo so that we can get what are called site identification signs out there at these locations so that when a visitor comes to visit, they'll see a sign that connects that site to the Camino Real and lets people know that they are visiting a site along the trail. Other areas in the city that are part of the trail are locations such as San Fernando Cathedral, Main Plaza, and the Medina River Greenway down near the Paso de Dolores in southern Bexar County. If we head down the La Bahia portion of the road to Goliad, Mission Espirito Santo and Presidio La Bahia in Goliad are also sites along the trail. The mission is administered by Texas Parks and Wildlife as a state park, and it's a beautiful site there on the San Antonio River, which is just across the river from Presidio La Bahia. And in my opinion, Presidio La Bahia is probably the best example of a Spanish presidio anywhere in the Southwest. And if you've never been to Goliad, I would encourage you to go out and visit. It is a really beautiful little town that's still remote to this day, just as it used to be when this was the northern frontier of New Spain. Heading east along the trail, places like Mission Tejas and the old stone fort in Nacogdoches are also sites along the trail. Mission Tejas is a Texas Parks and Wildlife site near Crockett, Texas, and it has a commemorative structure that you see here to commemorate Mission San Francisco de los Tejas that was established in 1690. It's also one of the rare places that there's an actual swale within the park, which is a remnant of the road that you can walk in there and get that true vicarious experience of walking through the woods, just as Spanish settlers and explorers did hundreds of years ago. The old stone fort that you see pictured on the bottom right-hand corner is also known as the Casa de Piedra, and this is now a museum replica on the campus of Stephen F. Austin State University in Nacogdoches. Originally, it was Gil Ibarbo's trading center on the plaza there in Nacogdoches, right on the road. And an interesting little note about this, about Ibarbo's property as well, is that he had a place known as the Lobanillo Rancho, which our organization has been fortunate enough to buy a property in Deep East Texas known as the Lobanillo Swales, which was open to public visitation in April 2018. And so I encourage you to go to Lobanillo as well, which is just about 10 miles east of San Augustine if you can. It's always open to the public, free of charge, and once again, another great place you can see and experience the trail out there in East Texas. River crossings and trail segments are also places where you can see the trail. If you think about a river, it generally has very steep banks, and they can have these shallow, narrow channels. And so in order for people to have crossed them, they had to find these places where the rivers widened and those banks flattened out. And so places like Apache Pass, which you see in the upper left-hand corner of your screen, that's a historic crossing on the San Gabriel River. And it's near the San Javier Mission Complex and the Rancheria Grande in Milam County. And we've been fortunate enough in the last several years to work with our archaeological contractors to do some work out in the Rancheria Grande. And we've got 3 properties that have been certified out there in Milam County as official sites of the trail. We found 3 Native American village sites, swales in sandy soil. Researchers thought that the Spanish would never travel through sandy soil, and so they never assumed that swales would be there in that type of landscape. And we've also found more Native American artifacts than you can possibly imagine in the area. There is a site out there called the Connor Swales, which is owned by the Connor family, and they do open it on occasion for visitation. And this is, of course, in non-pandemic times. So I encourage you to visit our website and look at our news and events link. And when that site is open for visitation again, we'll let y'all know so you can get out there and experience the Rancheria Grande. On the upper right-hand corner of the image, you can see McKinney Falls State Park here in Austin. And you see it's a large limestone slab with some worn impressions going towards the Lower Falls crossing there of Onion Creek. And when I first moved here to Austin, 25 years ago, I used to go down there and go swimming sometimes. And this was before I knew anything about the Camino Real. And I said, wow, I just can't imagine that this path has been worn here by people coming to swim at this site. But it wasn't until later on that I finally came to realize, wow, this is actually part of the Camino Real. So it's a really neat place to experience the trail as well. And we're doing a lot of different kinds of research in the park as we, over the last year or so, trying to document other swales, rock walls, and trail remnants within it. In the center of the slide here, you can see Mission Tejas State Park once again. And if you look there, you can see that U-shaped depression. I'll try to point out with my cursor if I can. This U-shaped depression right here, this is what we talk about as a swale. And it's different from, say, a wagon road. If you look back up towards the Apache Pass shot, you can see some modern ruts, if you will, right here being formed by the current landowner crossing the river to his home back here on this property. Whereas the swale has that U-shaped depression that's carved into the landscape by human use. So once again, some really great places to see and experience the trail. And visit our website, elcaminotrail.org, and look at our story map to learn more about how you can see even more sites all along the trail. And as I begin to wrap up here, please do visit our website and learn more about us. We are a nonprofit 501c3, and we're only able to do what we do for the trail with the support of people like you. We try to be as transparent as we possibly can, so we put our meeting minutes up there, we put our financial records up there, our strategic plans, and things such of that nature. So if you are so inclined and you have the ability to do so, please become a member or make a donation today. And with that said, here is my contact information, and I would be happy to take any questions or comments at this point. Thank you.
So, I'll go ahead and get to some questions. We do have one question about your map. It says your map does not show the trail going through Victoria, but there are trail signs posted in Victoria. Are those signs correct?
Are those signs correct? Is that what the question was?
Yes, because they said it in your map that you were showing in your presentation earlier. Victoria wasn't going through the trail wasn't going through Victoria, but they've seen the trail signs there.
Okay, is my screen still being shared? Because I can go back to the map.
Yes.
It is still being shared. Okay, great. Let me go back to the map so I can answer that question. And let's see here. Sorry, give me just 1 second. Yes, and thank you for that question. It is a good one. As you see, the official National Historic Trail Line does not go to Victoria at this time. And essentially, what we have done to try to, if you will, accommodate for that, is we have put official National Park Service signage within the Victoria area to recognize sites that are associated with the Camino Real. We do know as a fact that there were 3 Presidio and mission sites in the Victoria area prior to their being located at Goliad in 1749. For instance, the first site of Presidio La Bahia was established right on top of Fort St. Louis in Brazoria County on Garcitas Creek. So historically, yes, Victoria is very associated with the trail and the Camino Real. And at some point in the future, you could see this trail line change so that the Victoria area actually has that trail line going through it. But that literally does take an act of Congress to make that happen. It's not something that can be done very easily. And so we're doing our best to acknowledge those sites there in the Victoria area. And that's why you see those National Park Service signs at places like Mission Valley, Tonkawa Bank, and otherwise.
All right. We had another question. Is National Park Visitor Center for the trail?
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
Is the National Park Visitor Center for the trail? Is it part of the trail?
There's, to my knowledge, not a National Park Visitor Center that's specifically focused on the Camino Real. There are 2 national parks that are associated with the trail, and that is the San Antonio Missions and the Cane River National Heritage Area out in Natchitoches. Both do have interpretive information about the Camino Real, but neither have an official visitor center that is specifically about the Camino Real. There are some Texas Parks and Wildlife sites, I should say, that recently did have official Camino Real visitor centers open, and that's Goliad State Park, Mission Tejas State Park, and the not too distant future McKinney Falls State Park here in Austin will also have an official Camino Real visitor center. So those are the main ones that are out there right now, but there are lots of places that are associated with the trail that are administered by various entities such as the Texas Historic Commission, Louisiana State Parks, or even nonprofits like us and the River Pierce Foundation.
All right. Those are all the questions I see. If you have any more questions, go ahead and type them up. Before we go, though, I do want to thank you for joining us today, Mr. Gonzales. I've learned a lot myself, and I'm sure our guests have too. I'm not seeing any other questions, so with that, I think we are good to go.